Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and here we are, one day after the big midterm elections of 2022. What have we got? Well, we've got some modest gains for Republicans in the House of Representatives, and that's good. We've got incumbent Republican governors holding on to their offices across the board undefeated, and that's very good. We've got disappointment in overall results that were not as bullish as we had hoped, and many polls had suggested we should expect. Oh, and over in the Senate, the fate of the majority of the Senate will come down to a special runoff election in the state of Georgia, it looks like. In other words, the day after Election Day in 2022 feels a lot like the day after Election Day in 2020. Our nation appears to be just as divided today as it was 2 years ago, and the election results will be delivering a government that reflects that narrow division. But you see, it wasn't supposed to be this way. What happened? Well, let's start with some good news first. You may call this positive spin, you may call it naive, you may call it a Pollyanna outlook, but it appears to me that when the next Congress convenes in January, Nancy Pelosi will not have her hands on the Speaker's gavel. The Republicans will be in the majority, albeit a slim one, and that means that Joe Biden and the Democrats will have obstacles to any destructive legislation they would impose on our nation. Now, whether it's a one-seat majority or a 100-seat majority, when you can block the Democrats and Joe Biden and send Nancy Pelosi into retirement, well, in my book, that's a good day. And you shouldn't let anyone tell you otherwise. But you see, all the pollsters told us it was going to be a bigger majority, 20, 30, maybe even 40 seats. Why didn't Republicans come out to vote, everyone's asking? Well, here's a thought. Maybe they did. They're just not voting where the pollsters thought they would vote. You see, many of the turnout models used for this election cycle's polls utilized the 2018 and 2020 turnout models. But in a post-COVID pandemic America, it looks like those models don't truly reflect reality. You see, Republicans did vote in huge numbers where they live now, in Florida and Texas and any other state that they all fled to during the pandemic. That migration made the difference in Florida from Ron DeSantis' razor-thin victory 4 years ago to his 20-point landslide last night. Why didn't Republicans vote for Lee Zeldin in New York or Tudor Dixon in Michigan or Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania? Well, because they don't live in New York, Michigan, or Pennsylvania anymore. They live in Florida or Texas or Georgia or anywhere else you saw a red wave washing up to shore last night. But you see, on a day like this, the day after an election when things didn't go quite like Republicans wanted, an analyst is going to gain a lot more attention with anger and acrimony and finger pointing. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen it. I know I have. Watch the dinosaur cable news media or scroll your favorite social media platform. You're going to see an expert guarantee you that the Republicans underperformed yesterday because they were too Trumpy. But if you don't like that, just wait a minute or so on the same channel or scroll one or two tweets lower and you'll see another expert say that they underperformed yesterday because Republicans weren't Trumpy enough. It's fair to say that there's a lot to be gained in this business by assuring everyone that the world would be a lot better if everyone had just listened to me. There's many people right now blaming Mitch McConnell for using his vast funding campaign mechanisms in races that they didn't approve of, and not funding candidates like Blake Masters in Arizona. We're told McConnell was angry that Trump had criticized him and called him names, and well, because Trump endorsed Masters and Trump called McConnell names, now McConnell's not going to give any funding to Masters, and it all feels very junior high, doesn't it? But there's others who will blame Trump for criticizing McConnell in the first place. I mean, what's he doing attacking a fellow Republican senator when he should be focusing on the Democrats? And oh, by the way, last we checked, President Trump's sitting on a pretty big campaign chest of his own. I mean, if it's okay to criticize McConnell for not supporting financially Masters, then maybe we should be able to criticize Trump for the same thing. Now, others are blaming Kevin McCarthy and the leadership in the House, or Ronna McDaniel at the RNC, or Senator Scott in the Senate, because they didn't have a good strategy to win nationwide. They're all accusing each other. They're all passing the blame. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and say who's right and who's wrong. It's not up to me to jump up and down and blame others. But I do want to make one observation here. Last month, Nancy Pelosi was on MSNBC, and she was asked about the growing number of Democrat candidates who wouldn't commit to supporting her for Speaker of the House if they win their election. Take a look at her response.
let me raise a tough issue for you.
Yeah.
Which is members of your own caucus, Elisa Slotkin and Abigail Spanberger, they're in tough districts. I know they're in tough fights. But they're talking about generational change because all the leadership being over 80, the president is also, if reelected, going to be in that category. So let's talk about what Elisa Slotkin said on Meet the Press. I want to play that for you.
I have been very vocal, including with my own leadership in the House, that we need a new generation. We need new blood, period, across the Democratic Party, in the House, the Senate, and the White House. I think that the country has been saying that.
So what do you say to your own caucus, to these young members? They're, obviously in tough fights, but they want to see the change.
I say just win, baby. Just win. If that's what you have to say to win, fine. And we will not in any way do anything but totally supportive, mobilization-wise, message-wise, money-wise, for those people to win their races. Yes, we need generation.
That's right. And she did support them mobilization-wise and money-wise. And guess what? Elisa Slotkin, she did win that tough race in Michigan. Just win, baby. Call me any name you want. Say you won't support me. Say whatever it takes to win your district. Do that. Just win, baby. Now, listen, I like the fact that we Republicans aren't quite as cutthroat and mercenary and downright scary as Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats when it comes to winning an election. But maybe if all of our Republican leaders could just swallow their pride a little bit and remember the goal here is to just win, baby, and not get caught up in the junior high stuff, maybe we'd have a better outcome. One other thought. A lot of you might be looking at states like New York, Pennsylvania, Michigan. They've got rising crime. They've got devastating repercussions from the pandemic shutdown that were quite draconian in those states. It affected the economy, the businesses, even their children's futures. And you're wondering, I don't get it. How can those people vote for more of the same? You're wondering, why aren't they like Republicans in Florida who voted to affirm freedom and liberty and individual rights over those draconian, hypocritical, and, by the way, unscientific actions of the Democrat governors during that pandemic? And I would agree with you, but it's finally time we realize something about our fellow Americans who don't vote the same way we do. You see, at the same time, you may be dropping to your knees and thanking God that you live in a state where children were allowed to go to school, your 2-year-olds didn't have to wear masks for hours at a time, and you were allowed to keep your job despite your refusal to get the COVID vaccine. At the same time, your fellow Americans in a neighboring state are dropping to their knees and thanking God that their child was protected from the virus with remote learning, mask mandates, and aggressive vaccine protocols. They actually think their governor saved their children's lives. They believe it just as passionately and fervently as you. We are a divided nation, and we see things very differently from our Democrat brothers and sisters. And at the same time, you don't understand how they could vote for Kathy Hochul in New York. They think Floridians have a death wish for voting for Ron DeSantis. It seems irreconcilable, doesn't it? And maybe it is. Or maybe we need to start having conversations with each other, recognizing what we disagree about. And instead of just leaving angry comments on each other's social media pages, figure out what we do agree on. See, we Americans, we're good at talking things out, and maybe our country can be united on those things we agree on, and all it takes is the right leader to remind us of what those things are.